Hi, I am Ariel. This is my English story. I did not know any English. When people spoke English, I could not understand. The words sounded strange. I felt lost and confused. But now I speak well. I can talk with friends, read books, and write sentences. It was not easy, but I did it. Let me take you back to the beginning. I remember the first time I heard English. It was on TV. The characters were speaking a language I didn't understand. They laughed, talked, and seemed happy. But I couldn't join in. I wanted to understand. I wanted to be part of their world. At school, English was a subject. The teacher wrote words on the board. She said them out loud. But to me, they were just sounds. I couldn't make sense of them. My classmates seemed to get it. They nodded, repeated the words, and even made sentences. But I sat quietly, hoping the teacher wouldn't call on me. I was afraid to speak. What if I said it wrong? What if they laughed at me? I did not know any English. Now I speak well. One day I decided I wanted to change. I wanted to learn English. I wanted to understand those TV shows, talk with my friends, and do well in school. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to try. First, I talked to my parents. I told them I wanted to learn English. They were supportive. They said learning a new language was a good idea. They encouraged me to start small and not give up. That gave me hope. I started with the basics. The alphabet was my first step. A, B, C. I practiced each letter. I wrote them down one by one. At first, my letters were shaky. Some were too big, others too small. But I kept practicing. Soon, my letters looked just right. I was proud of my progress. Next, I learned simple words. Cat, dog, apple. These were words I saw every day. I made flashcards with pictures and words. I looked at them often. I said the words out loud. Slowly, the words started to make sense. I could see a cat and say cat. I could hold an apple and say apple. It felt good to know these words. Practicing every day was important. I set aside time each day to study. Sometimes I was tired. Sometimes I wanted to play instead. But I remembered my goal. I wanted to learn English. So I practiced. Every day I learned a little more. I started to make sentences. I am Alex. This is a book. These were simple sentences, but they meant a lot to me. They were my first steps in speaking English. I practiced with my friends. They were kind and patient. They corrected me when I made mistakes. They cheered me on when I got it right. Their support made a big difference. Speaking out loud was scary at first. I was afraid of making mistakes. But I learned that mistakes were okay. They were part of learning. Each mistake taught me something new. Over time, I became less shy. I spoke more and more. I felt my confidence growing. Reading and listening were also important. I started with children's books. They were simple and had pictures. I could look at the pictures and understand the story. I read the words out loud. I repeated them until they sounded right. I listened to English songs. Music made learning fun. I sang along, even if I didn't understand all the words. Slowly, the songs made more sense. I watched English cartoons. The characters spoke clearly. I could follow their stories. Watching cartoons helped me learn new words and phrases. Writing was another step. I started with simple sentences. I like cats. Today is sunny. I wrote in a journal every day. My sentences were short, but they helped me practice. I paid attention to spelling. I wanted to write the words correctly. Spelling was tricky at first. Some words were hard to spell, but I practiced. I used a dictionary to check my words. Each day, my writing improved. I took small steps. I didn't try to learn everything at once. I focused on one thing at a time. This made learning easier. Each small step added up. Over time, I saw big improvements. I joined an English club. We met every week. We talked about different topics. We played games in English. The club was fun and helped me practice speaking. I made new friends who were also learning English. We helped each other. We shared tips and encouraged one another. I found language partners online. We talked through video calls. They wanted to learn my language, and I wanted to learn English. We helped each other. It was like having a friend to study with. We practiced speaking and listening. We corrected each other's mistakes. This helped me a lot. I asked for help when I didn't understand. I asked my teacher, my friends, and my parents. They were always willing to help. They explained things to me. They gave me tips and resources. Asking for help was important. It showed me that I didn't have to learn alone. Learning English changed my life. It opened new doors. I could talk with more people. I could understand more things. I felt more confident. I was proud of my progress. Now, I want to help others. I want to share my story. I hope it will inspire you. If you are learning English, know that you can do it. Start small. Practice every day. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Ask for help when you need it. Keep going, even when it's hard. You can do it too. Start small and keep going. Thank you for listening to my story. Good luck with your English. At first, English was hard. I did not understand words. They seemed like a puzzle with no solution. When I heard people speaking English, it felt like they were talking in a secret code. I tried to listen carefully, but the sounds were strange. They did not make sense to me. I felt frustrated. In school, English class was the most difficult for me. The teacher would speak in English, and I could only catch a few words. She would ask questions, and I didn't know the answers. I felt embarrassed. I wanted to hide or disappear. My classmates seemed to understand everything. They could read, write, and speak in English. But I struggled with every word. When we had to read out loud, I was scared. My heart would race, and my hands would shake. I worried about making mistakes. I worried that others would laugh at me. Sometimes I pretended to be sick, so I wouldn't have to go to English class. But deep down, I knew I couldn't run away forever. I had to face my fear. One day, I decided to start with the basics. I realized that I needed to build a strong foundation. So, I began with the alphabet. A, B, C. I took a piece of paper and wrote down each letter. I practiced writing them again and again. At first, my letters were uneven. Some were too big, others too small. But I kept practicing. Slowly, my letters became neater. I felt a sense of accomplishment. Learning the alphabet was like opening a door. Each letter was a key. Together, they formed the building blocks of words. I found joy in this simple practice. It was fun to see how letters combined to create new sounds and meanings. I used flashcards to help me remember the letters. I made my own flashcards with colorful markers. On one side, I wrote the letter. On the other side, I drew a picture of something that started with that letter. A for apple, B for ball, C for cat. I looked at these flashcards every day. I said the letters out loud. I traced them with my finger. The more I practiced, the more familiar they became. I also watched educational videos for kids. They were designed to teach the alphabet in a fun way. There were songs, dances, and animations. I sang along with the songs. I followed the dances. These videos made learning enjoyable. They helped me remember the letters in a playful manner. Learning English made me feel many emotions. At first, I felt nervous. Every time I tried to learn a new word, I worried about getting it wrong. I was afraid of making mistakes. I was afraid of being laughed at. But I knew that if I let fear stop me, I would never learn. So, I tried to be brave. I felt a sense of excitement when I made progress. Each time I learned a new letter or word, I felt proud. These small victories gave me confidence. They showed me that I could do it. They motivated me to keep going. There were times when I felt overwhelmed. English has many rules and exceptions. Sometimes it seemed like for every rule I learned, there was an exception that confused me. I felt like I was taking one step forward and two steps back. But I reminded myself that learning is a journey. It takes time and effort. I had to be patient with myself. Support from my family and friends made a big difference. My parents encouraged me every day. They told me that it was okay to make mistakes. They told me that every mistake was a step towards learning. Their words gave me strength. My friends helped me practice. They were patient and kind. They corrected me gently. They cheered me on. Their support made me feel less alone. I also learned to celebrate my progress. Every small step was a victory. I celebrated when I learned a new letter. I celebrated when I wrote a word correctly. I celebrated when I spoke a sentence without hesitation. These celebrations kept me motivated. They reminded me of how far I had come. I did not give up. No matter how hard it was, I kept going. I reminded myself of my goal. I wanted to learn English. I wanted to understand and be understood. I wanted to connect with others. This goal kept me focused. It gave me the determination to keep trying. Looking back, I see how important these early steps were. They were the foundation of my learning journey. They taught me patience, perseverance, and the value of small victories. They showed me that learning is not a straight path. There are ups and downs, but with determination and support, anything is possible. Now, when I speak English, I remember those early days. I remember the challenges and the small victories. They are a part of my story. They remind me of where I started and how far I have come. They give me the confidence to keep learning and growing. If you are starting to learn English, remember that it's okay to feel nervous. It's okay to make mistakes. Every step, no matter how small, is progress. Celebrate your victories. Ask for help when you need it. Keep going, even when it's hard. You can do it, just like I did. Learning simple words was my next big step. After mastering the alphabet, I was ready to build my vocabulary. I started with the words that I encountered every day. These words were familiar and easy to remember. They formed the foundation of my English learning journey. The first words I learned were simple and common: cat, dog, apple. These words were all around me. I saw cats and dogs in my neighborhood. I ate apples as a snack. Connecting the words to real objects helped me remember them. I could look at a cat and say, cat. I could see a dog and say, dog. I could hold an apple and say, apple. These simple words gave me confidence. They were like stepping stones. Each word I learned was a step forward. It felt good to know these words. They were the building blocks of sentences. With each new word, my understanding of English grew. Learning these words also made my everyday life easier. I could use them in conversations. When I saw a cat, I could tell my friends, "Look, a cat." When I wanted an apple, I could ask, "Can I have an apple?" These small achievements were exciting. They showed me that I was making progress. Flashcards were one of my favorite tools for learning new words. They were simple, but very effective. I made my own flashcards at home. I used colorful markers and index cards. On one side of the card, I wrote the English word. On the other side, I drew a picture of the object. For example, for the word cat, I drew a picture of a cat. Making the flashcards was fun. It was a creative activity that helped me remember the words better. The process of writing the word and drawing the picture reinforced my learning. Each time I used the flashcards, I felt more confident. I used my flashcards every day. I carried them with me wherever I went. During breaks at school, I would pull out a few cards and go through them. At home, I would review them before bed. Repetition was key. The more I looked at the flashcards, the more the words stuck in my mind. I also played games with the flashcards. Sometimes I would shuffle them and try to guess the word just by looking at the picture. Other times, I would challenge myself to write sentences using the words on the flashcards. These games made learning fun and kept me engaged. My friends joined in, too. We would quiz each other using the flashcards. They helped me pronounce the words correctly and use them in sentences. Their support and encouragement made a big difference. Learning together was motivating and enjoyable. Practice was essential in my journey to build vocabulary. Every day, I dedicated time to practicing English. Consistency was important. I knew that to remember the words, I had to use them regularly. Practice turned the new words into part of my everyday language. I started by speaking the words out loud. I would look at an object and say its name in English. If I saw a cat, I would say, cat. If I saw a dog, I would say, dog. This simple exercise helped me associate the words with the objects. It made the words feel more real and meaningful. Writing was another way I practiced. I kept a journal where I wrote simple sentences using the new words. The cat is sleeping. I have an apple. The dog is barking. Writing these sentences helped me understand how to use the words in context. It also improved my spelling and grammar. Listening was also a big part of my practice routine. I listened to English songs and watched English cartoons. These activities made learning fun. I sang along to the songs, even if I didn't understand all the words. Over time, I started recognizing the words I had learned. Watching cartoons was helpful too. The characters spoke clearly, and the stories were easy to follow. I could hear the words in action and understand how they were used in conversations. Repetition was key to remembering the new words. I repeated them every day. I used them in different contexts. I spoke them, wrote them, and listened to them. Each repetition made the words more familiar. They became part of my active vocabulary. I also set small goals for myself. Each week, I aimed to learn a certain number of new words. I wrote them down and checked them off as I learned them. These goals kept me focused and motivated. Seeing my progress on paper was satisfying. It showed me that I was moving forward, step by step. Challenges were part of the process, too. Some words were harder to remember than others. When I struggled with a word, I didn't give up. I found new ways to practice. I used it in more sentences. I drew pictures of it. I asked my friends for help. Persistence paid off. Eventually, the word would stick. I also used technology to aid my learning. There were many apps and websites designed for language learners. These tools provided interactive exercises and games. They helped me practice vocabulary in a fun and engaging way. I could learn at my own pace and track my progress. One of my favorite apps was a language learning app that used spaced repetition. It reminded me to review words at specific intervals. This method ensured that I didn't forget the words I had learned. The app also had quizzes and challenges that tested my knowledge. It made learning feel like a game. My family supported my practice efforts too. My parents encouraged me to speak English at home. They asked me to name objects around the house. They listened to me read my journal entries. Their encouragement and interest made me feel proud of my efforts. Building vocabulary was a gradual process. It took time and effort. But with each new word I learned, I felt more confident. My vocabulary grew, and so did my ability to communicate in English. The simple words I started with were just the beginning. They laid the foundation for more complex learning. Looking back, I realize how important those early words were. They were the first steps on my journey to mastering English. They gave me the confidence to keep going. They showed me that learning a new language is possible, one word at a time. If you are learning English, start with simple words. Use flashcards to help you remember them. Practice every day. Speak, write, and listen. Repetition is key. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Each mistake is a learning opportunity. Celebrate your progress, no matter how small. Keep going, and you will see improvement. You can do it, just like I did. After building my vocabulary with simple words, I was ready to start constructing sentences. This was an exciting step. It felt like I was putting the pieces of a puzzle together. Each word I learned was a piece, and now I could start forming complete thoughts. I began with the simplest sentences. I am Alex. This is a book. These sentences were straightforward and easy to understand. They were short but powerful. For the first time, I could express myself in English. It was a thrilling feeling. To construct sentences, I needed to understand basic grammar. I learned about subjects and predicates. I learned that every sentence needs a subject, the person or thing doing the action, and a predicate, the action or description. In I am Alex, I is the subject, and am Alex is the predicate. In this is a book, this is the subject, and is a book is the predicate. I practiced making sentences every day. I used the words I had learned and put them into simple sentences. The cat is black. I have an apple. She is my friend. Writing these sentences helped me understand how words fit together. It also improved my grammar and spelling. I also learned about articles, a, an, and the. These small words are important in English. They help to clarify which specific thing we are talking about. A cat means any cat, while the cat means a specific cat. An apple means any apple, while the apple means a specific apple. Understanding articles helped me make more precise sentences. To reinforce my learning, I wrote in a journal. Every day, I wrote simple sentences about my life. Today is sunny. I went to school. My mom made dinner. This daily practice helped me become more comfortable with writing in English. It also allowed me to review and reinforce the vocabulary I had learned. Speaking practice was a crucial part of my learning journey. Constructing sentences on paper was one thing, but speaking them out loud was another challenge. I needed to practice speaking to improve my pronunciation and fluency. I started by speaking to myself. In my room, I would say the sentences I had written. I am Alex. This is a book. Hearing the words out loud helped me become more familiar with their sounds. It also helped me practice my pronunciation. At first, I felt silly talking to myself, but I soon realized it was a valuable exercise. Next, I practiced speaking with my friends. They were very supportive. They understood that I was learning and were patient with me. We would have simple conversations in English. They asked me questions, and I tried to answer in complete sentences. How are you? I am fine. What is this? This is a pen. These conversations were short but helpful. They gave me the confidence to speak more. My friends also corrected my mistakes. If I said something wrong, they would gently correct me. It's not, he is a friend of me. It's, he is my friend. These corrections were invaluable. They helped me learn the correct way to say things. Over time, I made fewer mistakes and spoke more fluently. I also joined a language exchange group. This group was made up of people who wanted to practice different languages. Some were learning English, while others were learning my native language. We took turns speaking in each language. This gave me the opportunity to practice English with new people. It was a bit intimidating at first, but everyone was friendly and supportive. In the language exchange group, we played speaking games. One game was to describe a picture in English. I would look at a picture and try to describe what I saw. There is a cat on the table. The boy is playing with a ball. This game helped me practice using different words and constructing sentences on the spot. Another game was role-playing. We pretended to be in different situations, like ordering food at a restaurant or asking for directions. I would like a sandwich, please. Where is the nearest bus stop? These role-playing exercises were practical and fun. They helped me practice speaking in real-life situations. Overcoming shyness was one of the biggest challenges I faced in learning to speak English. At first, I was very shy. I was afraid of making mistakes. I was afraid that people would laugh at me or think I was not smart. This fear made it hard for me to speak up. But I knew that if I wanted to improve, I had to overcome my shyness. I had to be brave and take risks. I had to be willing to make mistakes and learn from them. One thing that helped me was positive self-talk. Whenever I felt nervous about speaking, I would tell myself, "It's okay to make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. That's how we learn." This positive self-talk gave me the courage to speak up. My friends and family also played a big role in helping me overcome shyness. They were very supportive and encouraging. They never laughed at my mistakes. Instead, they praised my efforts and progress. Their encouragement made me feel more confident. I also set small, achievable goals for myself. Instead of trying to speak perfectly right away, I focused on small steps. My first goal was to answer a simple question in English. How are you? I am fine. Once I achieved that, I set a new goal, to have a short conversation in English. What is your name? My name is Alex. Where are you from? I am from Brazil. These small goals helped me build confidence gradually. As I practiced more, I noticed that my shyness started to fade. I became more comfortable speaking in English. I realized that most people were kind and patient. They wanted to help me succeed. This realization made it easier for me to speak up. I also learned to laugh at my mistakes. When I said something wrong, I would laugh and correct myself. Oops, I meant to say, she is my friend, not she is a friend of me. Laughing at my mistakes made the learning process more enjoyable. It also showed others that I was not afraid to try and fail.
Hi, I'm Daniel, and I'm excited to share my journey of learning English with you. Not too long ago, the idea of speaking English felt like an impossible dream. I remember those days clearly. I would sit in my small room surrounded by textbooks and notebooks, feeling overwhelmed by the sheer amount of work I had ahead of me. It was as if a giant wall stood between me and the world I wanted to explore, and that wall was made up of words I didn't understand and sentences I couldn't form. Back then, every time I tried to listen to English, it sounded like a blur of sounds that I couldn't make sense of. Watching movies without subtitles? Forget it. Even simple conversations were a struggle. I couldn't follow along when people spoke quickly, and I found myself nodding and smiling, pretending to understand when, in reality, I was lost. The thing is, I knew how important English was. For as long as I could remember, I had dreams of traveling to new places, meeting people from different cultures, and advancing in my career. But all of those dreams seemed out of reach without English. I needed it to communicate with colleagues at work, to navigate through different countries, and even to enjoy things like reading books and watching shows in their original language. It felt like English was the key to a door that led to so many opportunities, and I didn't have it. I remember sitting there, thinking about all the things I wanted to achieve, and feeling a mix of frustration and determination. I had to do something, but where was I supposed to start? I didn't know anyone who could guide me, and the more I thought about it, the more daunting it seemed. The fear of failure was real. I worried that I wouldn't be able to learn, that I'd always struggle, and that I'd never reach my goals. But deep down, I knew I couldn't let that fear hold me back. I couldn't ignore the importance of English any longer. It was time to take the first step, no matter how small, and begin my journey. And so, with a mix of uncertainty and hope, I decided to dive in, determined to turn my dream into a reality, one word at a time. As I sat there, thinking about the obstacles in front of me, I began to realize something important. If I truly wanted to achieve my dreams, I had no choice but to learn English. It wasn't just a skill, it was the key to unlocking a future I'd always imagined for myself. Every time I pictured what my life could be like, English was at the center of it. I could see myself walking through the streets of cities I'd only read about, ordering food in a bustling cafe in Paris, or asking for directions in New York. I imagined meeting people from different cultures, exchanging stories and ideas, and forming friendships that would span continents. These were the things that excited me, the things that made me want to get up every morning and push forward. But it wasn't just about travel and new experiences. I knew that learning English could open doors in my career as well. I dreamed of working in an international company where English was the bridge between colleagues from all over the world. I wanted to be part of a team that solved problems, innovated, and created something meaningful. But to do that, I needed to communicate effectively in English. I needed to be able to express my ideas clearly, understand what others were saying, and contribute to discussions with confidence. These thoughts fueled my determination. I knew that learning English was no longer just an option, it was a necessity. It was the path to the life I wanted, and I couldn't let anything stand in my way. I needed to take action, and I needed to do it now. So, I made a plan. The first step was to enroll in an English class. I found a local language school that offered evening courses, perfect for fitting into my schedule. The first day of class was nerve-wracking. I walked into the room, feeling like a fish out of water, surrounded by other students who seemed more confident, more prepared. But I reminded myself why I was there. This was the first step on my journey, and I couldn't let fear stop me. Next, I bought a few books that were recommended by my teacher, simple grammar guides, vocabulary books, and a couple of short novels written for beginners. I spent my evenings and weekends poring over these books, trying to absorb as much as I could. It wasn't easy. The grammar rules were confusing, the vocabulary overwhelming, and every sentence I read felt like a puzzle I couldn't quite solve. I knew I needed more exposure to the language, so I turned to the internet. I started watching English videos online, everything from tutorials and documentaries to interviews and movie clips. But at first, it was like trying to tune into a radio station with poor reception. The words flew by too quickly, blending together into a blur of sounds that were impossible to decipher. I'd pause and rewind, trying to catch individual words, but it was frustrating. My brain wasn't used to processing English at that speed, and it felt like I was drowning in information I couldn't grasp. Despite the challenges, something inside me wouldn't let me give up. I reminded myself of my goals, the places I wanted to go, the people I wanted to meet, the career I wanted to build. I knew that every minute I spent struggling with English was a step closer to making those dreams a reality. I was determined to keep going, no matter how difficult it seemed. I understood that learning a language wasn't going to happen overnight, but I was willing to put in the effort. Each day, I pushed myself a little further, knowing that one day it would all start to make sense. And so, with each video I watched, each page I turned, and each class I attended, I felt a small spark of progress. It was slow and often frustrating, but I was moving forward. I was on my way to becoming the person I wanted to be, and that was all the motivation I needed to keep going. As the days turned into weeks, my motivation became a powerful force driving me forward. Each time I felt overwhelmed, I would close my eyes and picture myself achieving my goals. I imagined standing in a meeting room, confidently presenting my ideas to colleagues from around the world. I saw myself sitting in a cozy cafe, chatting with new friends I had made while traveling, our conversation flowing effortlessly in English. These visions of my future weren't just daydreams, they were my fuel. I started setting small goals for myself. I challenged myself to learn 5 new words every day, to finish reading a chapter of my book without looking up every other word, and to understand just a little bit more of each video I watched. It was these small victories that kept me going. Every time I learned a new word or understood a phrase without needing to translate it in my head, I felt a surge of pride. These moments reminded me that progress, no matter how slow, was still progress. But there were still days when doubt would creep in, when I would question whether I was truly making any headway. On those days, I would remind myself of why I started this journey. I wasn't just learning English for the sake of it. I was doing it to build the life I wanted. I was doing it for the future I dreamed of, for the opportunities that were waiting for me on the other side of this challenge. In those moments of doubt, I would also look back at how far I'd already come. Even though the road ahead was long, I had already taken the most important step, the first one, and as long as I kept moving forward, no matter how slowly, I knew I would eventually get to where I wanted to be. With that thought in mind, I pushed forward, more determined than ever to conquer the language that once seemed so out of reach. The first few weeks of my English learning journey were some of the hardest I've ever experienced. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality of just how difficult it was to break through the barriers of a new language. Every day felt like an uphill battle, and more often than not, I found myself struggling just to keep up. Pronunciation, for example, was a constant source of frustration. No matter how many times I listened to a word, trying to imitate the sounds, they just wouldn't come out right. The English TE sound, in particular, was my nemesis. I couldn't seem to get my tongue in the right position, and when I did, it felt so unnatural that I would stumble over my words. I would practice in front of the mirror, repeating words and phrases until my mouth felt numb. But still, the sounds wouldn't flow naturally. I could hear the difference between my attempts and the way native speakers pronounced the words, and it made me feel self-conscious. Each time I tried to speak, I was painfully aware of my mistakes, and it embarrassed me. I worried that people would judge me for my accent or misunderstand me entirely. Then there was grammar, an endless maze of rules and exceptions that seemed impossible to navigate. I spent hours trying to wrap my head around verb tenses, articles, prepositions, and sentence structure. Every time I thought I had something figured out, I would come across a sentence that broke the rules I had just learned. I would mix up my tenses, use the wrong prepositions, or forget the proper order of words. The sheer complexity of English grammar was overwhelming, and I often felt like I was drowning in a sea of rules that I couldn't master. Speaking with others was another major challenge. In class, when it came time for conversation practice, I would freeze. It was as if my brain went blank the moment I tried to speak. I knew the words. I had studied them, written them, and repeated them, but when I needed them, they seemed to vanish. I would struggle to string together even the simplest sentences, fumbling over words and hesitating as I searched for the right phrases. My classmates seemed to find it easier, and I envied their fluency. They would converse effortlessly while I sat there, paralyzed by my fear of making mistakes. It wasn't just in the classroom either. When I tried to use English outside of class, the same thing happened. Whether I was asking for directions, ordering food, or attempting small talk, I would stumble over my words, my nerves getting the better of me. My heart would race, and my mind would spin as I tried to remember the right words, the right grammar, the right pronunciation, all while under the pressure of a real-life conversation. The fear of saying something wrong or being misunderstood was so intense that I often found myself avoiding speaking English altogether. It was easier to stay silent than to risk embarrassment. There were days when the challenges felt insurmountable, when I would sit in my room after a particularly difficult class, feeling defeated. The progress I had imagined seemed so far out of reach, and I would wonder if I was really cut out for this. Maybe I wasn't as capable as I thought. Maybe learning English was just too hard for me. Those were the moments when doubt would creep in, whispering in my ear that I should give up, that I would never really master this language. But as much as I was tempted to quit, I knew deep down that giving up wasn't an option. I had already invested so much time and effort, and I couldn't let all of that go to waste. More than that, I knew that if I quit now, I would regret it later. I would always wonder what could have been if I had just pushed a little harder, stayed a little longer. I didn't want to look back on this period of my life with regret, knowing that I had let fear and frustration stop me from achieving my goals. So, even on the toughest days, when it felt like I was making no progress at all, I reminded myself of why I started this journey in the first place. I held on to the vision of my future, the dreams that had inspired me to learn English, and I told myself that the only way to make those dreams a reality was to keep going. Even when it felt like I was moving backward, I knew that each challenge I faced was a necessary step on the road to success. And so, I resolved to face those challenges head-on, no matter how difficult they were, knowing that every struggle brought me one step closer to the person I wanted to become. After battling through those initial weeks of frustration and doubt, I came to a crucial realization. If I wanted to succeed in learning English, I needed a better plan. The random, unstructured approach I had been using wasn't enough. It was clear that just attending classes and hoping to absorb the language wasn't going to get me where I wanted to be. I needed a strategy, a systematic way to build my skills and gain confidence. So, I sat down and began to craft a plan that would work for me, one that would allow me to make steady progress, even if it was just a little bit each day. The first thing I decided was to make English a part of my daily routine, no matter how busy I was. I realized that consistency was key. It wasn't enough to practice only when I had a full hour or when I felt particularly motivated. Instead, I committed to practicing every single day, even if it was just for 10 minutes. I started small, knowing that it was better to do a little bit every day than to overwhelm myself with too much at once and risk burning out. My new mantra became, "A little progress each day adds up to big results." One of the first tools I incorporated into my routine was flashcards. I knew that expanding my vocabulary was essential, but I also knew that simply reading lists of words wouldn't be enough. I needed a way to actively engage with the language, to make those new words stick in my memory. Flashcards were perfect for this. I started by creating a set of cards with the most common English words and phrases, writing the English word on one side and the translation or definition on the other. I carried these cards with me everywhere I went, on the bus, during lunch breaks, even while waiting in line at the grocery store. Whenever I had a spare moment, I would pull out my cards and quiz myself. Over time, I began to notice that the words I had struggled with were starting to come to me more naturally. It was a small victory, but it gave me the confidence to keep going. In addition to flashcards, I sought out ways to immerse myself in English as much as possible. One of the most enjoyable methods I found was listening to English songs. Music had always been a passion of mine, so it seemed like the perfect way to combine something I loved with my language learning goals. I started with songs that were slower and had clear lyrics, so I could focus on understanding the words. At first, I would listen to the song several times without looking at the lyrics, trying to catch as many words as I could. Then, I would look up the lyrics and read along as I listened, pausing to translate any unfamiliar words or phrases. Finally, I would sing along, trying to mimic the pronunciation and rhythm of the singer. This not only helped me improve my listening skills, but also made learning English fun and enjoyable, something I looked forward to rather than dreaded. Movies and TV shows also became a major part of my learning strategy. I knew that watching content in English was one of the best ways to hear the language in context, with all its nuances, idioms, and natural speech patterns. However, I quickly realized that jumping straight into watching movies without subtitles was too challenging for me at that stage. So I started by watching movies with English subtitles. This allowed me to match the spoken words with the written text, helping me to understand the dialogue and pick up on new vocabulary. I would pause frequently to repeat phrases, practicing my pronunciation and trying to mimic the intonation of the actors. Over time, I began to recognize common phrases and expressions, and I felt a sense of accomplishment every time I understood a scene without needing to rely on the subtitles. But perhaps the most important and transformative step I took was to start speaking English with native speakers. This was by far the most intimidating part of my plan. The thought of putting myself out there, of speaking English in front of people who were fluent, terrified me. I was afraid of making mistakes, of embarrassing myself, of being judged. But I knew that if I wanted to improve, I couldn't avoid this step. So I pushed myself to take the plunge. I started small, engaging in brief conversations with my English teacher after class or with classmates who were more advanced. These interactions were nerve-wracking at first, but I quickly realized that the fear of making mistakes was holding me back more than the mistakes themselves. The truth was, the more I spoke, the more comfortable I became. I began to see mistakes not as failures, but as opportunities to learn. When I made an error, whether it was using the wrong word or mixing up my tenses, I would take note of it, ask for clarification, and try to correct it in the future. I found that native speakers were often patient and encouraging, appreciating my efforts to learn their language rather than criticizing my errors. As I continued to practice speaking, I noticed a gradual shift in my confidence. Conversations that had once left me tongue-tied started to feel more natural. I no longer hesitated as much when searching for the right words, and I found myself able to express my thoughts more clearly. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and that progress motivated me to keep pushing forward. In time, my daily practice, whether it was through flashcards, music, movies, or conversations, started to pay off. I could feel my understanding of English growing stronger, and with it, my confidence. The challenges I had faced in the beginning, pronunciation, grammar, and speaking, were still there, but they no longer felt like insurmountable obstacles. Instead, they became milestones on a journey that I was finally beginning to enjoy. The most important lesson I learned during this phase was that language learning is not about perfection. It's about persistence. Every mistake, every struggle, and every small victory was a step forward. And as long as I kept moving forward, I knew I was on the right path. My plan was working, and with each passing day, I felt more and more certain that I would reach my goals. There comes a moment in every learner's journey when all the hard work, the hours of practice, and the countless challenges suddenly converge into a single, transformative experience. For me, that moment came on an ordinary afternoon in an ordinary cafe. a moment that would forever change the way I saw my progress in learning English. It was a quiet day, and I had decided to take a break from my studies and treat myself to a coffee. I found a small table in the corner of the cafe, took out a book to read, and settled in. The cafe was bustling with people, a mix of locals and tourists, and the hum of conversation filled the air. Normally, I would have tuned it out, focusing on my book, or simply enjoying the ambiance. But that day, something was different. As I sat there, sipping my coffee, I caught snippets of a conversation at the table next to mine. The voices were speaking in English, and before I realized what was happening, I found myself listening in. At first, it was just a few words here and there, nothing unusual. But then, as the conversation continued, I noticed something remarkable. I wasn't just catching isolated words or phrases. I was actually understanding what they were saying. The conversation flowed naturally, and to my surprise, I could follow along. They were talking about their plans for the weekend, discussing places they wanted to visit, and sharing stories about their travels. And I understood most of it. I couldn't believe it. It was as if a switch had flipped in my brain, and suddenly all the hours I had spent practicing and studying were coming together. I sat there, pretending to read my book, but my mind was racing. I was hearing English, real English, spoken at a normal speed, and I was understanding it. The realization hit me like a wave. All the hard work was finally paying off. For the first time, I felt like I was truly engaging with the language, not just as a student, but as a participant in the world around me. As I left the cafe that day, I couldn't stop smiling. I replayed the conversation in my head, marveling at how much I had understood. It was a small victory, but it felt enormous. It was the breakthrough I had been waiting for, the moment when everything started to click, and I could see just how far I had come. A few days later, this newfound confidence was put to the test. I had arranged to meet a friend from another country, someone I had met through my English class. We had agreed to speak only in English as a way to practice and challenge ourselves. We met at a park, and after the usual greetings, we sat down on a bench and started talking. At first, I was nervous. Despite the breakthrough at the cafe, I still doubted my ability to hold a full conversation in English without freezing up or making too many mistakes. But as we talked, something surprising happened. The conversation flowed naturally. We talked about everything: our classes, our families, our hobbies, and our plans for the future. The words came to me more easily than ever before, and even when I stumbled or made a mistake, I didn't panic. I corrected myself, or sometimes just let it go, and kept the conversation moving. We talked for almost 30 minutes. It wasn't a perfect conversation. I made a few mistakes, forgot some words, and occasionally struggled to express myself the way I wanted to. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that I had done it. I had held a real conversation in English with another person for half an hour, and I had enjoyed it. As we wrapped up our conversation, my friend smiled and told me that my English had improved a lot. Hearing that felt like a validation of all the work I had put in. It was one thing to notice progress on my own, but to have someone else recognize it was incredibly rewarding. I realized that I had reached a significant milestone in my journey, a point where English was no longer just a subject I was studying, but a language I was using, living, and experiencing. That day marked a turning point for me. The fear and hesitation that had once held me back began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of confidence.